M16. Another day in Los Santos. Yeah. Tryna make a way in Los Santos. Hey, yeah. Wake up every morning, I got money on my mind. Gotta get on my grind. And if you ain't talking about no money, little homie.
Okay, welcome back. Appreciate you joining me for the third section of the tutorial. We're going to continue on from where we left off. We left off at we had identified our rig. And sent it over when we used our item in our inventory. We had used that rig to identify our lure and our rod for our fishing modifications. And now we're ready to do our use rod logic. Alright, so we're going to start KSUIE fishing client use rod. We're sending to that function our location, our rod, our lure, and our rig. So here's our net event for client use rod, and we're bringing over our location, our rod, our lure, and our rig. We're going to set up some base variables. We want our local fish to equal 0. We don't have a fish named yet, so we're going to call it nil. We're going to create our base odds, which is going to be a math random between 1 and 1000. This math.random, that just generates a random number between 1 and 1000. And you can set that up to any numbers you want. And it'll just generate a random number between that window. And then our rod mod time is equal to 0, our rod mod odds are equal to 0, and our lure mod odds are equal to 0. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is calculate our rod mod time. So rod mod time is going to equal to our config rod modifier dot rod dot time. So we brought our rod over. So it's going to, this line right here on 421 is going to go to the config, the rod modifier. Let's find the rod modifier. It's up. That's alright. Let me find it. Let me just go ahead and collapse this one, collapse that one, collapse our fish price. Okay, here's our rod modifier. Okay, so here's our rods. So in our example, we said we had a common rod. So I'm going to look at this real quick. Config.rodmodifier.rod. The brackets, those brackets around rod means that it's going to look for this specific value, and then it's going to return the dot time. So here's common, which we're using for our example, and here's the time equals 0.0. So you get no improvement in your time to fish. If you were using, say, advanced rod, then you get a 65% reduction in the amount of time that it takes to catch a fish. But for this example, we're just going to continue with common. All right, and then I'm going to print that to make sure I got a value. And this will print whatever time is relevant to the rod we sent over. And so then our rod mod odd is going to be the second value here. And so for a common, you have no increase in potential for catching a better fish. And so it's just a straight 1.0. Nope, let's undo that. Just a straight 1.0. As you go up the tiers and rods, you get modifiers to your odds. I'll explain that a little bit more here in a second. All right, and then I want to print my rod mod odd just to make sure that I got a value. And then I'm going to check, is the location coastal, or is the location hot zone, or is the location ocean? That means I'm going to have an opportunity to catch a saltwater fish. So if it's one of these locations, coastal, hot zone, or ocean, then it's going to look for lure mod equals configure.lures.saltwater, because I'm in saltwater. If I'm in one of those three zones, that's saltwater. And then I'm going to pull my lure odds. So here's my lure that I brought over. So it's going to go look at the config, and it's going to say, if for this statement specifically, it's going to say if you're in saltwater, then we're going to look in this saltwater table for the lure, and we're going to grab the odds for that lure. So shrimp is the lowest tier. you get no improvement in your odds. Ultimate bait's the highest, you get a 1.5 improvement in your odds. In this case, for our example, we said we were in freshwater, so this statement is false. So then it's going to come down here and say that we're in freshwater. If we're not in any of those zones, those are the 3 saltwater zones, we're definitely in freshwater. So it's going to go check the lure's freshwater lure odds. And we said we were using a common worm for this example. So here's our freshwater, and a worm is better than bread, so we're going to get a 1.1 increase in our odds. So our lure mod odd would now be equal to 1.1. And we're going to print that, and we'll just verify it in our console that we did indeed get a 1.1 because we were freshwater common worm. And so then our total fish odds is going to be our base odds, which was the math random number, times our rod mod odds, which in this case was 1.0, times our lure mod odd, which is in this case 1.1. So it's going to be base odds times 1.1 is going to give us our odds to catch a fish at a number between 1 and 1,000. So for the sake of example, let's say the random number that was generated was 100. It's now 110. And so after it's multiplied out, so we would still catch fish tier 1. So if our location is coastal, we're not in coastal. Okay. So we say, is the location freshwater? Yes, the location is freshwater. So our fish odds are 110. So we're going to catch fish tier 1. All right. And if you can set these odds up for anything you want. You just want them to get increasingly difficult to achieve. And the highest odds are going to be your best fish. And if you're not less than 950, then you're above 950, then anything above 950 is going to catch the tier 9 fish. So there you go. And then our fish name, we're going to look up our fish value, and we're going to find our fish name and assign it here. So to recap for our example, we're using common rod with a worm bait in coastal. So our rod mod odd was 1, and our lure odd was 1.1. And we're saying for our example, we generated a random number of 100. So our final number is 110. So whenever it runs through this in freshwater loop, it says 110 is less than 300. So it's going to return fish 1. And so here I'm going to assign the fish name. So I'm going to go to config.fishzones, location is freshwater, and tiers is 1 because my fish equals 1. Fish is 1. It's going to look at the config Lua, and it's going to say my fish name is, let me jump back real quick. We're in fish zones location. So we can minimize this, and here's our fish zones. Our location is freshwater, and our tier is 1. So the player is going to catch a bluegill. And so this is config.fishzones freshwater. Fish 1 is the fish name equals to that branch of the table, which is equal to bluegill. So basically fish name equals bluegill. And then we have this print statement, and the print statement in the console would say freshwater fish selected equals bluegill. And that's just a troubleshooting print. The prints aren't required, they just help you troubleshoot, make sure all of your logic is working correctly. All right, and so then once it identifies the fish, it multiplies your odds and everything, then we're going to trigger going fishing. And the location, fish name, rod mod time, lure, rig, and rod are all going to be sent to go fish. So then we need to create our event for go fish. And we're going to bring over the location, the fish name, the rod mod, the lure, the rig, and the rod, and we're just going to immediately kick off our function try to fish. And we're going to send to try to fish our location, fish name, rod, mod, time, lure, rig, rod. Now for try to fish, I had to modify the base QB fishing. So this is essentially a copy of the base QB fishing with a couple of modifications. So I'm bringing over the variables that I sent here. You got your function, and then you put all your variables that you're receiving. I'm doing a print to make sure that I kicked off try to fish, and then I'm going to do a callback. And this is from the base script, QB fishing script, and it's going to check: am I swimming? Am I in a vehicle? If the count's not equal to nil, then if the count equals 0, then it's going to not notify the player that they need a lure or a bait attached to a rod to fish. That means that they were trying to use just a fishing rod with no bait. If they're standing next to water and they're facing the water and they're not in water, then the water is going to be validated. And if the water is validated, then the local fishing rod, this is where we're going to create our cache data for the PED, and we're going to generate a fishing rod. And we're going to cast bait as the next function we're going to do, and we're going to send all these variables over to cast bait. Else, it's going to tell the player that they need to aim towards the water. If they're not facing the water, they're not next to the water, it's going to tell them to cast towards the water. And then it's going to end, and it's going to send the rig. Okay, so let's do, next is going to be cast bait. That's the next function that we're going to launch through this logic. And again, this is from the base QB fishing. I didn't write most of this, but I did modify it so that I'm bringing over my variables, all the variables that I sent here on 524. I'm bringing those in to cast bait so that I have all that information. And I'm going to use that information to modify my fishing time. So I'm not going to go through all the animation stuff. I mean, this is all, if you have QB fishing in your server, you already have all of this animation stuff and it's all written properly already. What I modified was bait time. So for started baiting, it's going to get the game timer. And then for bait time, I'm going to adjust my bait time based on the rod mod time. So my rod mod time is going to reduce how long it takes to catch a fish. And so I'm going to take the base bait time of 30 seconds, and I'm going to subtract from that 30 seconds times rod mod time. In our case, for our example, we're using a common rod, so this is going to be 30 seconds. Actually, the bait time would be I might have done that wrong now that I think about it. No, I know it works right because it takes me longer to fish with a common rod. Let's look at the config. Common 1. Oh, time is 0. Okay, yes. So the 0 times, because we're using a common rod and our rod mod time is 0. So this is going to be 30,000 minus 0. So that's going to be, it's going to take 30 seconds to fish with a common rod. If we were using a different rod, let's say we were using a coastal, then it's going to take 15 seconds instead of 30 seconds because we're cutting it in half. So instead of waiting for 30 seconds for a fish to bite, you would wait for 15 seconds. Then this stuff is just the base stuff that's built into the QB fishing default. I don't think we made any changes to any of this stuff. Yeah, all that's present except for my trigger server event. I changed this to receive fish. So whenever you're done fishing and you've successfully caught a fish, then it's going to trigger receive fish. your caught fish is going to be try to catch fish. That's going to be your mini game. So let's go ahead and put that function in. So I changed that nothing. You can see I brought over the variables just to be consistent, but they're all dark blue because they're not used anywhere. This is all straight out of base QB fishing. I changed nothing on try to catch fish. It's exactly the same. So we've caught our fish, we're clearing our ped tasks, and then we're going to trigger our server event, and then we've got a different receive fish. There's a couple more functions we got to add in here. Back up whenever the player first started trying to fish. Let's see, where was that at? Okay, right here, this if the water's validated and there's a cast location, you want to make sure the cast location is in the water. So that's a function we need. And again, this is in water is straight out of the base QB fishing script that pretty much everybody has. Um, Back up here, this is another function we need, generate fishing rod. We haven't entered that function yet, so here it is. Again, this is from the base QB fishing script, nothing altered. And then we got to do our handle store. This is going to store the name of the fishing rod. And again, nothing changed here. Yeah, I didn't change anything. This is actually not being used because I changed up my selling part of the script. I could probably delete that, but I'll just leave it. It doesn't hurt anything. We got our animation function that we need to add. Again, this is just QB fishing base script. You can just go to the functions.lua in QB fishing and all those functions you're going to need. And I didn't alter any of these that I'm pasting right now. We got our fade out and our fade in and our wait for models. Fade out, fade in, wait for model. All these functions have not been altered from the base QB fishing. Checking to see if the player has a fishing bait. In this case, we're not using the base. The base fishing script checks if they have a worm and a fishing rod. But since we've created these rigs, I sent over the rig variable for has fishing bait, and that just basically changes whether it's going to check the player's inventory and make sure that they have a fishing rig. So that's slightly modified. I added in some logic and to give them, they're not going to lose their lure every time they fish, but I created this little bit of code here for if they, it's going to generate a random number and it's going to remove their rig. And we haven't written that part of the code yet, but this is just a little piece I added in so that they can't use their lure forever. Eventually their lure will fail based on a randomly generated number. And we need a citizen create thread for the player ped ID. And again, this is from the base functions in the QB fishing. All right, so that's everything we need for our client script. Let's go back to where we started pasting all these functions that came from the base fishing script. Go fish. Client go fish. Where is that? Oh, that's my net event. Okay, so I did that. So then we did try to fish. And we tried to fish. And then we casted our bait. And we tried to catch a fish. I'm sorry, I forgot where I was at here. Generate fishing rod. Yes. Yes. We got the fishing bait. We may have lost our lure. We're going to do that on the main side. Okay, so this is everything we need for the client side. Let's see. So the one we're looking for is whenever we successfully caught a fish, we're going to trigger an event called receive fish. Okay, so right here. So if caught fish, then we're going to trigger a server event, receive fish. So we go back over to our main Lua. We don't have that server event, so we're going to create it. So if the player received a fish, then we're going to do KSUIE receive fish, and we're going to bring over our cast location, just because we don't use it for anything, but I just like to be consistent in my variables that I'm sending around. We're sending over the fish name, the rig, the lure, and the rod. We got our source equals source, as you always want to do as your first statement in the server side. We've got our player. We're going to grab our player's data. We're going to generate a luck number. And this is going to be the number we use to decide if they're going to lose their lure or not. We're checking item found is true. Item count is 1. We're just setting these variables up. And then the fishing rod hash, this is the prop that's going to be generated in the player's hand. And actually this is in the wrong place, and we're not using that method, so we can delete that, I think. Fishing rod hash, yeah, we don't need that. We'll delete that. So item found is true, so it's going to say if the item is found as true, then we're going to wait for 5 milliseconds, and the local fish equals the fish name that we brought over. The local item info is the QB core shared item, so this is back to our QB core shared Lua, and the fish is going to be the fish name. So in our case, we said we caught a bluegill, so this is going to be QB core shared items bluegill. It's going to add a bluegill to the player's inventory, 1 bluegill, because this is the receive fish. This means they successfully caught a fish. And it's going to trigger the inventory item box, and it's going to add the fish to their item box also. So this is adding it to their inventory, and this is adding it to their KSUIE item box. If their luck that was generated here is greater than 90, so there's a 10% chance that they're going to lose their fishing lure. If they do that, then we're going to trigger the client event lost lure, which is the one that I was showing you over here at the bottom. So if the odds are higher than, if they hit a number higher than 90, 10% odds, it's going to trigger this, and they're going to lose their baited rig is going to be removed, but it's going to return the rod to their inventory, because your rod doesn't break, you just lose your lure. So it's going to remove the common underscore worm, and they're going to get back just a common rod instead of a common underscore worm rig. And it's going to remove it from their item box and their KSUIE also, the common underscore worm. And it's going to give them a notification that their lure was damaged and removed, but they're going to have still their base rod that they had attached the lure to. All right, so that's just a little logic there, so they can't use their lure forever. And then we're going to have to put over here, we got to have this callback. This is whenever we did our get item data. This is from the base QB fishing script. Nothing edited there. And then now the player's caught a fish, they're going to want to sell the fish, and so we're going to throw in a logic for selling their fish. And we'll go through that in a minute, because we've got to go back to the main side to start dealing with selling fish. All right. Hopefully this is clear as mud. Okay. Let's scroll up and see if we did our setup shops at all. Yeah, we haven't set up shops yet. Okay. So to sell the fish, we're going to need a couple of local variables. This is going to be where we set up our shops. We're going to have our local station equals nil and local next equals next. Actually, I'm sorry. This local next equals next. That needs to be up here because we used that earlier. Remember, our very first statement was looking at the zones. So we'll go to fishing start. We want this here. And what we'll do is we'll just go down to right there. That's where you need that at. Was the very first loop that I beat the dead horse with. We had this next statement. You need that variable next equals next in order to do that. If you just put next in there, even though it's the same exact thing, it doesn't recognize it unless you have a local variable called next. Next equals next. All right. So we got our stations equal nil, and we're gonna set up our fishmongers. So this is different than the QB fishing script because I wanted to do my fishmongers with a target QB target on them. So this loop here, this 4kV loop, is going to be running through fishmongers, and it's going to be doing stuff. So for IJ in pairs config fishmongers K locations do. All right, so config Lua. Let's go to fishmongers. So these are my locations for my fishmongers. And this is La Spada, that's the coordinates where I want the ped to be standing. This is the icon I want to use whenever you look at the fishmonger. He's called a fishmonger. This animation stuff's not working. It's says that, I mean, this is the layout that you have in QB target, and I filled in the information, but it's not working right now. I need to figure out why that's not working, but anyway, so here's the hash for I'm going to use a chef as my fishmonger, and his location is going to be the same as the coordinates for the store location that I'm setting up. All right. So we're in our client Lua for the fishing script that we're writing, and so we're looking at fishmongers, and then for KV in pairs fishmongers. So that means that KV in pairs is going to be running fishmongers, and it's going to be running through fish sales, and then I think that's the level we're at there. What happened? Did I? Huh? Oh, I'm in the wrong one. Sorry. I'm supposed to be in the client Lua. All right. So fishmongers K locate. So for KV, that's just the fishmongers. Then we're going to run through the locations, IJ, and it's going to be pulling K. So it's going to be for every line of fishmongers, which in this case that's an extra step because we only have fish sales in this table. But that's fine. So there's only one entry, but it's going to be running through fish sales, and then it's going to check all the locations. So for fish sales, it's going to iterate through the locations. So each fishmonger, which is selected there, or fish sales, is going to rotate through the locations, and we're going to create a local hash key, and it's going to get the fishmonger's information. So we are in fish sales, We're in locations, so depending on where we're at, it's the spot. It's going to be iterating through all this table. It's going to grab the model hashes, and then it's going to load the models, and then it's going to export to QB target the spawn ped, and then this is all the information you need for QB target. And then it's going to go to the next fishmonger, and it's going to grab his data and spawn him, and then it's going to go to the next fishmonger, grab his data and spawn him. So what this loop right here, what this thread is doing, this entire thread, is it is running through this config file for fishmongers, and it's creating all of the peds and spawning them in to the map. And it's using this information in this table to determine where to place the peds and and what event they're going to trip whenever they are clicked on, etc. All right, and so then whenever you third eye the fishmonger and you right click on him, he's going to give you an option to sell fish. Whenever you click sell fish, it's going to trip this function. And I'm putting in a print just to make sure that the function is tripped when it's clicked. And then I'm going to go and do a server event to sell fish, which we've already pasted in. This is our sell fish logic. Okay, so we've walked up to our fishmonger, we've third item, we've right clicked on him, we've picked sell, and I put a print here just to make sure that I received it after I clicked the ped. And then it's going to check. We got our local source like we always have whenever we're working on server side. We're going to grab our player data, and we're going to set price equal to 0. And then what it's going to do is it's going to search the player's inventory to see if he has any fish. And so if the player has anything in his inventory, then it's going to tell me that the player has items. And then it's going to run through every item in the player data's inventory. It's going to do a loop, 4 kV in pairs. It's going to run through his entire inventory, everything he's carrying. And I've got a troubleshoot loop here to make sure everything's working properly. And then as it's running through his inventory, then it's going to grab the item that's next in his inventory, and it's going to say, okay, let's compare that to the fish price. And let's find, here's fish price. So it's going to look at the item in his inventory. So if he has a sardine, for example, if he's caught a sardine, then it's going to say, okay, the player has a sardine in his inventory. Let's look through fish items, and we're gonna these are 2 prints to troubleshoot to make sure I know what item is looking for. And then this QB core debug M is a table, and so I want to dump that table to see, just as a troubleshoot. QB core debug is how you print to your console any table variables that you're receiving. So this is just dumping my table to make sure everything's working correctly. And it's going to say, okay, so the player has a sardine. We identified a sardine in this step of the loop. It's checking the fish price to look for a sardine. So if there's a match, then this won't be nil. All right, and so if the player.player data items k.name, so if the player's inventory item that we're looking through the fish price table for is equal to L, the first step in that loop is going to be an individual item. So M is a table, and L is the item that we're iterating through. So it's going, when it's going through the loop here, it's saying, okay, sardine, anchovy, pinfish, puffer, snook, redfish, snapper, etc. Each loop. And so the L is sardine and the M is the table. And I know that's kind of confusing, but let's step through it real slow because it's important. So we are in we've grabbed we've iterated through the player data's inventory. Okay, so it's got the player data. It's iterating through his inventory and looking for items that match. So we said that he has a sardine. Okay, so then it's going to go to the fish price and it's going to do an iteration through the fish price. So each step in the iteration, the name of the fish is L and its table is M. L and M. Okay, so he has a sardine. It's doing a comparison to the fish price and it's looking for a sardine. And so if the player data items is not equal to nil, and if the player data items dot name equals L, so if sardine equals sardine from the fish price, then it's going to give us a price. So the price becomes whatever the price was on the previous loop plus m dot price, because m is the table. So we're in sardine. So this is our L, and this table is our M. Okay. Now this table only has one variable in it, but we can have multiple variables, and price is equal to 2 for the sardine. So it's going to be 2 times however many the player has in their inventory of sardines. So just think of player.playerdata.itemsk.amount. In this case, is the number of sardines that the player has. This part, player.playerdata.items.k, for our example, is sardines. And then .amount is how many sardines the player is carrying. And then we're going to remove the sardines from the player's inventory. And we're going to print that we're inside the loop, and we're going to report the price. And then we're going to loop for the next item and see if he has any of those to sell. When it's all said and done, the price has incremented every time by the number of fish that he's selling. And then we're going to, once we've iterated through the entire inventory, then we're going to dump out. We're going to do a print to see what the final price was. And then we're going to add money to the player for all the fish that he sold. And we're going to tell him that he sold all of his fish. So this loop is going to sell every fish he has in his inventory. And I believe that's it. That's it. Now, that's going to conclude this section of the tutorial, but there's more to know. So in order for everything that we just did in our scripting logic to work, we're going to have to make a way for a player to create the rigs that are in our config.lua, which is the rigs. So I don't want players to be able to just go buy these rigs. They have to make them. So they have to take a worm and combine it with a bait caster to get a bait caster worm. We've already talked about this in the very beginning of the tutorial series about creating this stuff in the shared Lua, but there's some tricks here that I'm going to go through in the next video. So if you want to learn how to modify your QB inventory combine logic so that you can do more complex inventory crafting, you'll want to definitely tune in for the next tutorial where I'm going to explain how to modify your QB inventory in order to do more complex inventory crafting. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned some things. I hope you understand the loops a little better. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the video, and I'll do my best to answer. It's if you understand how these config luas work and how the table the IJKL, if you understand how the for loops work to evaluate these configs, you can really improve your coding, and you can reduce the amount of memory usage that you're using with your codes, and you can basically eliminate ever having to edit anything in your other files, because you can just come in and modify your config tables and change the available rigs. You can change the lures, you can change the odds, and you don't have to ever edit your script again. You can just use these config tables to do any editing that you want to do if you properly use the loop functions. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. I hope you've learned something from the tutorial. If you like it, give me a like. Feel free to share it and ask any questions you have below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Tune in for the next tutorial, where we'll be talking about how to make more complex, to improve the QB inventory base so that you can make more complex inventory crafting scenarios. Thank you.
Hey, it's M16. Another day in Los Santos. Hey, tryna make a way in Los Santos. Hey, yeah. Wake up every morning, I got money on my mind. Gotta get on my grind. And if you ain't talking about no money, little homie, I ain't even got time. Another day in Los Santos. Tryna make a way in Los Santos. Yeah, another day in Los Santos. I gotta make a way in Los Santos. Look, I'm about my cash. Weasel on top, cause you know we get the bag. M16, never fold, never drag. Tryna make the city out and put us all on the map, no cap. And you know that's the truth. Hit me if you need a track, cause I stay up in the booth. In the city where it's gritty, but your dreams come true. Everybody on their grind, and that's something I salute. Yeah, I told y'all I'ma make it. On my soul, I'm too real, I can't fake shit. All the love that y'all show is amazing. Gotta be on top, cause I came from the basement. 16. Wake up every morning, I got money on my mind.